UI, or the user interface, is one of the most important aspects of a game. It is comprised of menus that you click through and HUDs or heads up displays that are present during gameplay. Its job is to tell as much information to the player while taking up as little space on the screen. Determining your UI is a lot more involved than one might think. It involves determining what style of UI you would like to go with, what specific things you want to share with the player, and where you want the UI to be located on the screen. These are all fascinating questions that game developers will answer differently, and it will lead to many unique takes on UI design. In this video, I wanted to highlight some UI I find to be interesting in my research, specifically in terms of the heads-up display, as well as talk about how I came to determine how I want my UI to be displayed in my upcoming game, Dragon Dungeons. So let's get right into it. The first thing to discuss is the style of UI. This video by one of my favorite game developers of all time, Masahiro Sakurai, does an incredible job explaining the give and take between clarity and style, and this was a big reason for having myself think about how I want to provide the player with the information that they are given, and I would like to explore some of his ideas with some more different examples. So for this, let's think about the most basic information you might want to show their player. The health. How do different games attempt to tell your player this single bit of information? Let's start with one of Nintendo's classics for the Switch era, Breath of the Wild. This game has a lot of information to give the player when you're playing through the game, such as your controls, the map, the time, the weather, and of course, your health. Now, most Zelda games take the age-old approach of telling the player your current health via a health bar. In this case, the health is slightly themed, as instead of a bar, we're shown a horizontal list of heart sprites that get updated in real time whenever the player is damaged or healed. Now, this kind of information is pretty easy to replicate, and it's also fun to experiment with. We can add heart containers or remove heart containers simply by changing the amount of child nodes that are in the container. And we can specify the exact amount of health by updating this last couple of sprites to replicate what the current health situation looks like. But some games may attempt to share this information in a more different way. And so for that, let's look at a game called Call of Duty. In almost every Call of Duty back in the day, there was no indication of how much health the player currently had. And with the quick time to kill and a fast respawn time, I can see why they would stray away from different approaches. However, they were still able to show this information to the player, just in a more realistic way to them. And this was through blood splatter on the screen. When the player takes damage, the screen flashes and leaves a mark of blood to indicate that damage has been taken. The more damage you take, the more blood that is marked on the screen. And this is a very natural way to show the player your health, since it's a very realistic game. As the player heals or regenerates health, the blood will disappear over time. And so it's from this that we can actually see how it would be replicated. And it can be accomplished through different screen overlays that depend on your current health and what your regeneration status is at. So for example, when we take damage, we'll put a screen overlay, and then if we take more damage in a short amount of time, we'll put like the second layer of a screen overlay. And then we'll start a timer, and when it times out, we'll start updating our health. Once our health reaches a certain threshold, we will remove one of the overlays. And you can kind of just repeat this process for whatever your health is at. Both methods are very effective ways to communicate information, but they do differ in the priorities that they have. Games like Zelda are prioritizing clarity in their UI, as they want the player to always know how much health is currently available to them. Although they're trying to be creative in using hearts, lots of other games like Enter the Gungeon use similar ideas, as a heart is the most common association with health in games. And so for that, the style is kind of hurt and is less unique. On the other hand, games like COD are prioritizing their style. They make it feel more creative in sharing information, or in this case, realistic. However, they do lose out on some clarity, as it's often hard to tell just how many times you can be hit before dying, unless you're counting the hits yourself or just know that information beforehand. So for my game, I knew I wanted to try to be more creative in the use of my information given. And so with my character being a fish, I thought it would be only fitting to have a fish themed UI. So with that, here are some of my UI bits. You can see for my health bar, I have a fish that will turn into a skeleton fish as more damage is taken. I felt that this was more of a decent compromise as it showcases the style of my game while still holding on to that clarity. With the style in place, the next thing to determine is how much information is needed to share with the player, and this can vary quite heavily depending on the genre of your game. For example, let's take a look at a classic, the original Super Mario Bros. On the NES. The HUD for this game only contains 4 key points of information: the current score, the current level, the amount of coins collected, and how much time the player has left to complete the level. Very minimal, but this is still an adequate amount of information to tell your player since it's a simple platformer. However, since I'm making a roguelite, I wanted to compare the elements I show to that of games within my genre. And so I found this awesome blog going over the UI of Hades and how they would like to update it. And that will be linked in the description if you would like to check it out. The most intriguing bit to me though was when it shows a screen with every bit of UI that Hades currently uses and explains what each piece represents. This was my building block for determining my UI for Dragon Dungeons. As you can see, there are a lot of elements this game needs to track, but the most important areas to me are the abilities, the resources, the player's information, and any call to actions. Therefore, when I was designing my own HUD, these were the elements I wanted to focus on, and therefore, I don't know why I said that again, but okay. I decided that my game would have an area for those 4 main features. However, I also had a few additional pieces of information that I wanted to convey, those being the current floor and the pause button. Since my game never tells the player explicitly that pausing is a feature, I would like to share that information within my HUD, and since I plan to make the current floor more important, especially for determining what biome the player is in, I want to also make sure that it's available to the player at any time. So with the knowledge of what is needed to show the player, we can now move on to where we show this to the player. Deciding where to place HUD elements is as difficult as deciding what to display. Take for instance the article we just went over in the previous part, where its entire point was a new layout for the HUD in Hades. This truly is where the developer has the most creativity to design a layout that they believe will highlight the elements of their game the best. Some games, like Inscription for example, will take this opportunity to have a heavily diegetic layout, where the information for the player is so intertwined with the game itself, it would not even appear at first glance to be a HUD that the player can interact with. But for example, items are bottles that are just on the right side of the table. The current score is a scale that you place things on as the game progresses. And the bell to end your turn could have just been a button that is clicked, but they're all implemented here in a layout that is integrated. However, most other games will tend to stick their elements around the outline of their screen, either placing items in each of the corners or on the cardinal directions. This idea works great as everything is a glance away from the middle of the screen where the current action is taking place. And most of the time the elements are either small enough to not be obtrusive, or when they are large like a minimap for example, they can be made more translucent to not take away from the gameplay. This is what I used as a pillar when I made my first iteration of my HUD. I placed my health bars on the bottom left, I put my items along the top, I had my resources on the bottom right, and the pause on the top left. However, if you remember back to one of my original builds that I talked about in my first couple videos, this could be seen as a bit busy, and although I kept elements strictly on the walls of my screen, it still felt like it could cover important elements of the gameplay or just feel cluttered. So I took it back to the drawing board and did some more research. I came across this really great video on canvas sizes for games, and it's also linked in the description. And one idea really caught my eye.
What I like to do is start with a resolution of 640 by 360 and then create my own black bars to simulate a different style of resolution. This also comes with the added benefit of being able to add information and HUD elements onto the black spaces, which I personally think, if done right, can gradually enhance your game's aesthetic.
So from there, I was hooked on doing something similar for two reasons. Number one, it would greatly reduce the clutter of my game because I would have dedicated space for these heads-up display elements. And number two, it would finally allow me to change my window size from the unorthodox 176 by 240 to a more common 180 by 320. My original viewport was due to my inspiration for Game Boy games, as that is the native resolution that most Game Boy games run at. But as my game has progressed along, I do think a more common resolution size that can be easily scaled up to 1080p would be more favorable. One more thing to take this a step forward was the single screen in a recent game I was playing called Isles of Sea and Sky. When you're on the main menu, there are these like two pillars that are on the left and the right hand side of the screen. And when the game begins, they slam together to load the game. And this instantly made me want to create a similar idea but for my HUD, so that I would display all information on the left and right of the screen, and then whenever we enter loading screens, I would just slam these together and then unslam them when things had been loaded. Although this is something that won't be implemented for a bit, I can still make these pillars now, and so that's exactly what I did. And so now you can see our new HUD. I'm quite happy with how it turned out. You can see that we have lots of similar things to the Hades HUD that we went over before. I've got my player information on the left, got my pause button on the top on the left hand side as well. I've got my resources on the right as well as my player abilities. And you might be wondering where my call to actions are. And I actually made those a part of the actual things that have call to actions instead. So instead of having it on that screen, whenever an item like a chest is asking for a call to action, the actual chest will be the one to bring up that HUD instead. And I actually got that idea from that previous article as well. So this deep dive into heads-up displays and UI has been a very productive one, and I do believe I have been left with a really nice little HUD. I definitely think it looks better than the original HUD I've had, and it's definitely the best iteration so far. I do believe I can still have room for improvement and make it better, but for now I'm just going to let it simmer before I make any further changes. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you all for watching to the end of the video. I've got some more video ideas in the works that are less focused on game development but still gaming related, and so I hope you all will enjoy those. I apologize for the missed video. I got a little busy with the holiday times, but I have been getting some content going recently. I've been writing a lot more scripts and all that, and so I'm pretty confident I can still keep the twice a month videos coming from here on out. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.